Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we've got a really interesting mission, one that's specifically for you, our listener.
That's right.
You shared a fascinating piece with us, basically making a case for astrology's validity.
And we know astrology often gets, well, a skeptical reception.
Definitely. But your curiosity about understanding the arguments within this text, that's exactly why we do this.
Yeah, we're not here to, agree or disagree, but to really unpack what this author is claiming in the material you sent over.
We want to get past the usual pop astrology stuff you see everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Sun signs and vague predictions.
Exactly. Think of this as our focused look at your sources, the articles, maybe notes you took, just pulling out the key ideas for you.
It could be a surprising discussion, actually. The arguments might go in directions people don't expect.
Okay, so let's dive in. The author starts off, well, pretty frustrated, actually.
Yeah, they mention feeling there's malice sometimes and just a basic lack of understanding about astrology.
And they make this analogy saying rejecting astrology without looking into it is like rejecting around Earth without understanding the science.
Which is a bold comparison.
Yeah.
It immediately signals they believe there's real substance being ignored.
It's a call for, genuine inquiry before judgment. Don't just dismiss it out of hand.
Which sets the stage for them to explain why they think it's being misunderstood.
Right. And the first big thing they tackle is that difference between pop astrology,
The sun sign column.
yeah, that stuff, versus a full, complex natal chart.
They use that analogy. Was it a headlight?
A single headlight doesn't make a whole car, meaning your sun sign is just one tiny piece of a much bigger picture.
It's a fair point, isn't it? If you only look at one element, you can't judge the whole system.
It immediately pushes back on the idea that astrology is simple or superficial.
Then they get into something maybe less familiar to people, the zodiacs. Tropical versus sidereal.
Okay, explain that a bit.
Well, the author says most Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac, which is tied to our seasons, equinoxes, solstices, that kind of thing.
Got it.
But Vedic astrology, they point out, often uses the sidereal zodiac. And that one accounts for the Earth's wobble, the precession of the equinoxes.
So it tracks more closely with where the constellations actually are in the sky over time.
That's the argument, yeah. The author is pretty critical of the tropical system, suggesting it sort of drifted from the stars themselves.
And they hint that maybe Vedic astrology seems more accurate to some people because it uses this sidereal system.
That's the implication. It introduces this whole other layer that even within astrology, there are fundamental disagreements about the basic framework.
So not a monolith at all.
Definitely not. Understanding that distinction is pretty important before you even start evaluating claims.
Okay, so we're already seeing it's more complex than meets the eye. Now, what about the science pushback? The author tackles that head on.
They do. They acknowledge, that traditional physics, gravity, magnetism, quantum mechanics hasn't proven astrology works. They concede that point.
But then they pivot, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting turn. They argue that early astrology wasn't necessarily about cosmic causes. It was more about observing omens.
Omens, like correlations.
Exactly. Observing patterns. Seeing that when certain things happen in the sky, certain types of events tended to happen on Earth. Correlation. Not necessarily saying the stars made it happen.
That's quite different from how most people probably think about it, like planetary rays influencing us directly.
Right. By framing it as pattern observation, they sort of sidestep the need for a known physical mechanism, at least for its origins. They're saying, look, people just notice stuff.
Okay, so if it's not direct physical forces, what is the proposed link? This brings us to chaos theory.
This is where they try to build a different kind of bridge. They bring up chaos theory as it's sometimes used in social sciences.
They mention a specific paper, Harvey and Reed in 1992.
Yeah, though they admit their knowledge comes from a synopsis by Grok 3, the AI. But the core idea they pull is about social systems.
Like ripples in a pond. That analogy.
That's the one. Human interactions are complex, interconnected. Small things can have big, seemingly unpredictable effects down the line, but maybe there's an underlying order to the chaos.
And how do they connect that to astrology?
Okay, so the author proposes that astrology might actually be a model, a predictive model, for these social influence patterns.
Wait, social patterns, not cosmic ones.
That seems to be the argument, that the patterns described in astrology correlate with the complex web of social and environmental influences that shape a person's development.
So the planets aren't puppet masters pulling strings?
No, in this view, they represent something more like different parts of the human psyche. Psychological mechanisms, maybe?
And the zodiac signs.
How those mechanisms tend to get expressed. And then you've got houses and aspects adding more layers of detail to this supposed psychological map.
It's definitely a more psychological or maybe sociological interpretation than a purely mystical one.
It is. It shifts the focus from direct cosmic intervention to astrology as a symbolic system that maps onto complex human and social dynamics. A subtle shift, but important.
Okay, now let's talk about the AI angle, because the author puts a lot of weight on this.
Right. They criticize studies that try to test astrology using human astrologers.
Why? What's the issue there?
Inconsistency, basically. Lack of standardization. Different astrologers might interpret the same chart differently, which makes scientific testing really tricky.
So human error or just different schools of thought?
Probably a mix of both. So the author argues for using large language models like this Grok 3 they mentioned.
Because AI would be more consistent.
That's the idea. They suggest LLMs are good at processing language-like systems and symbolism, so maybe they could interpret astrological charts more accurately and crucially, consistently.
And they're frustrated that AI isn't typically used in studies trying to validate astrology.
Seems that way. They see it as a missed opportunity for a more standardized approach.
Which brings us to the core of the text, really. The author's own experiment with Grok 3.
Yeah, this is presented as the central piece of evidence, or proof, as they frame it. The AI analyzed the author's personality profile alongside their natal chart.
Okay, so what data did they feed it?
They mention their Myers-Briggs type ENTPA and their Big Five results.
Let's see. High openness, high extroversion, low conscientiousness, low neuroticism, moderate agreeableness.
Right. Key traits like curiosity, flexibility, being sociable, balanced in diplomacy, pretty emotionally resilient.
And then the natal chart details. Aquarian rising.
Which often suggests someone presenting as independent, maybe unconventional.
Leo sun in the 4th house, Virgo moon also in the 4th. They list other placements too.
And Grok 3's task was to compare these two sets, the personality test results and the chart interpretation.
Looking for overlaps, right?
Exactly. Thematic overlaps. Things like extroversion, creativity, emotional stability, curiosity, relationship styles, adaptability.
And the author reports a specific score.
Yeah, a 91.67% comparative similarity score generated by Grok 3. That's a pretty striking number they put forward.
Wow. Did they address any differences? Because low conscientiousness, for instance, might seem to clash with some astrological interpretations.
They did. They mentioned Grok 3 reconciling things, like the low conscientiousness from the tests was apparently squared with Jupiter retrograde in the chart, which the AI interpreted as maybe a more internal, less conventional approach to structure.
Interesting. And the Virgo moon, sometimes seen as more reserved emotionally.
Right, maybe contrasting with the Leo placements. Grok 3 supposedly found ways to see how these different elements fit together in the overall personality described.
So the AI didn't just find surface matches, but tried to synthesize the whole picture.
That's the claim.
Yeah.
That it could handle the nuances and apparent contradictions.
Okay, but the analysis didn't stop there. It also looked at the author's actual work, their projects.
Yes, under the name Bird Flippin' Games. Grok 3 analyzed the themes and nature of these projects to build another personality profile.
Based on their creative output, what kind of traits came up there?
Things like creativity, obviously, but also empathy, analytical thinking, curiosity again, a visionary outlook, maybe a bit rebellious, playful.
And this project-based profile was then compared back to the personality tests and the natal chart.
Correct. A sort of triangulation. And again, the author reports strong overlaps: creativity, empathy, vision, curiosity, analytical skills, emotional resilience showing up across all three analyses.
It's like they're trying to show consistency from internal traits, tests chart, to external actions, projects.
That seems to be the goal, to build a case layer by layer, showing the same core themes reflected through different lenses.
Did this three-way comparison also reconcile differences?
Apparently so. Things like systems thinking, rebelliousness, pragmatic idealism, playfulness traits identified in the projects were then linked back to specific potentials or expressions suggested by the chart and test results.
The overall picture being painted is one of synergy then. Inner self reflected in outer work.
That's definitely the conclusion drawn, that the creative work is a natural extension of the core personality identified through the other methods.
So what were the final takeaways from Grok 3 about the author, according to the text?
It synthesized three key points. 1, highly creative, empathetic visionary, relentlessly curious. 2, a master of systems thinking and putting different ideas together. 3, driven to challenge norms and improve human experiences.
And it even suggested points for potential collaborators.
Yeah, 3 things. Visionary but rebellious, empathetic but needs technical help, perfectionist who gets systems, kind of a distilled how to work with this person guide.
And the author's ultimate point is that this kind of deep understanding, potentially unlocked by AI looking at astrology, is valuable.
Hugely valuable, they argue, for self-awareness, mental health, relationships. Feeling like your life isn't just random, but has a pattern.
That connects back to the chaos theory idea, doesn't it? Human sociological chaos as an intricate but potentially mappable pattern.
Exactly. It all ties together in their framework.
So the author wraps up with some final thoughts.
Yeah, emphasizing personal understanding for growth, cautioning against people speaking confidently about things they haven't studied.
Standard philosophical points, maybe?
Plus, the idea that humans share fundamental drives and that life has this underlying structure of influences.
And those questions about free will versus, what was it, learned choreography.
Right. How much are we really choosing versus following a path we can't even fully see? It gets quite philosophical at the end.
They also had a final critique of Western astrologers.
A perspective, anyway. That sometimes an attachment to astrotheological beliefs prevents a more multidisciplinary, maybe more objective understanding.
And the final call is for people to do the work, basically. Form their own perspectives through real inquiry.
That seems to be the closing message. Don't just accept or reject, but engage with the ideas.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive, just like you asked for, into a pretty complex and definitely unconventional take on astrology.
Absolutely. We've walked through the arguments and the specific evidence laid out in the text you shared, focusing on those claims about AI, chaos theory, and the author's own analysis.
And just to reiterate, we're not taking a stance on whether astrology itself is valid. Our goal is to give you a clear view of what this particular source argues.
Hopefully it gives you a unique lens, a different way to think about personality, maybe those societal influences we talked about, even prediction itself.
It's interesting how the author tries to connect these ancient ideas with very modern tech and concepts like chaos theory.
Whether you buy the conclusions or not, exploring those connections, examining different ways of thinking, that's always worthwhile, I think.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Does that core idea from the author about underlying patterns in human behavior, this sociological chaos, does that resonate at all with things you've observed, completely separate from astrology?
Or another angle. If AI can find these detailed correlations the author claims between charts and personality profiles, what could that mean more broadly for how we understand ourselves? What are the implications?
Lots to think about. We really encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, maybe even check out some of the related things mentioned in the source material if you're curious.
Thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us.